Truly overcoming imposter syndrome isn't about curing it. It's about moving through it so you can get to the other side where success lies. Hey there, my name is Dr. Beth Russell, and I want to know, what would you do if you were not afraid? Right now, what would your life, your job, your relationships look and feel like if you could be unapologetically you? What's holding you back? This podcast is for anyone that wants to make a change but isn't sure where to start. Let's look inward together and let's talk about you and me, our mental health, our self-care, inner and outer selves, and all that makes us, well, us. It's time to get real, feel the feels, challenge what's holding us back, and connect. This is the Authentic and Brave podcast. Recently, a friend of mine and I were talking over a glass of wine, and she brought up her desire to start a birthday party planning company. As quickly as she started talking about it, she backtracked. She came up with all the reasons why she couldn't do it, and most of them were shots at herself. She didn't have any formal training in it. No one would pay for her services. Her partner wouldn't approve of it. And what if it flopped? As I sat listening to her, I recognized all too well what she was saying. I'm curious. Have you ever had a new idea or task to do, and before you can fully let the dream out, your thoughts race to, what if nobody likes it? Who do I think I am? There's no way I could pull this off. I'm not good enough at this. What if someone finds out I'm a fraud? Or have you ever worked really hard to achieve something, and yet when you do, you feel like you don't belong? Or maybe you attribute your success to other people's support or even luck. If any of these sound familiar, it's because you may be experiencing imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome can strike at any time, usually when we are in what I call the uncomfortable zone. That's the part of us that knows we want something new, or we are even trying something we haven't before, and we begin to doubt ourselves. This doubt begins to impede our thoughts and eventually can stop us from moving forward on a task or even avoid trying altogether. Lately, since starting this podcast, my imposter voice has become louder. I experienced a similar voice several years ago when I published my first young adult novel called Kindreds. Kindreds was a labor of love that took me almost 10 years to put out into the world. And the day it came out, rather than celebrating, I felt drained, and a slew of doubts erupted inside of me about being an author. Putting a piece of my heart out into the world in the form of a book was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. Publishing was a long process, but what I didn't realize is that authors serve many roles beyond just writing a book nowadays. I felt at times like I was drowning in self-doubt each time a review for the book came in, and it made me not want to write anymore. It took me a long time to tell people about the book and refer to myself as an author. I wasn't an imposter. I wrote a book and I published it. The more I talked about being an author and what I was experiencing with one of my dear author friends, I realized that what I was going through was normal and that many people go through it. Now I'm working through those feelings of imposter syndrome when it comes to doing this podcast. After the initial excitement of making a podcast wore off, my inner voice has begun to talk louder and louder in my head. And man, sometimes she's really not nice. Starting a podcast is hard. And given that I'm a researcher at heart, I'm consistently looking for data, show topics. I listen to other shows, and I really have been tuning into certain podcasts to see what their style has been. And each time I do, I'm just in awe. I think they're amazing. And then my imposter voice gets louder. Why in the world would I do this to myself? I'm not as good as them. What if people from elementary school hear me and judge me? So many other podcasters are so talented. I could never bring what they do to this world. I should just give up. People are going to hate it. They won't listen. And maybe they won't even like me. The inner critic can be so big and so loud and not afraid to share her negativity and opinion about everything I am and do. Despite my education, my experience in teaching and public speaking, my self-doubt can sometimes take over. So I'm curious how imposter syndrome shows up for you and how you deal with it. Are you able to recognize when it's happening? Do you know that voice, and can you label it correctly? Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And that's what I want to talk about today. Let's chat for a few minutes about what constitutes imposter syndrome, what the thoughts are that come, and how it feels in our bodies. We can then start to address how to cope with it. I don't think imposter syndrome ever goes away completely, but there are definitely ways we can move through it. And it's important to remember, you're not alone if you feel like an imposter. In fact, one study found that 70% of all people have felt like an imposter at some point in their life. It often affects highly capable perfectionists. Does this sound familiar at all to you? We high achievers often have imposter syndrome in common. Just look at the famous people who admit to having it. Everyone from Albert Einstein, Serena Williams, Jennifer Lopez, Tom Hanks, Maya Angelou, and even former First Lady Michelle Obama. So welcome to the secret inner world where go-getters and movers and shakers are full of secret self-doubt that often others don't see. It can trip us up, stop us from making a decision, and mostly make us feel alone in our struggle. I remember I was going back to work after having my third child, and I posted something on Facebook about the myth of balancing motherhood and work. I was so overwhelmed, and I felt like I had no idea what I was doing as a parent so many days. I don't really remember exactly why I shared it, but several of my friends whom I had recently seen wrote to me saying that they had no idea that that's how I was feeling. What I was showing on the outside did not match what was going on the inside. And that's one of the hardest parts of imposter syndrome. We often don't share it. We worry about other people's judgments, and they may not like us or love us if they see the real deal. Lately, when imposter syndrome sets in, I have to stop what I'm working on and put it away. Even in the creation of this podcast today, I started and stopped about 20 times. I will do other tasks and focus on my children's, clients, students, dogs, anything that will quiet the inner critic. As a therapist, my clients encounter this harsh inner voice all the time. There's no way they would ever speak to anyone else the way they talk to themselves. There's no self-compassion, no empathy, and no room for creativity or growth when they're engaging in such debilitating negative self-talk. It's my job to help them voice the imposter syndrome that holds them back, as well as the self-compassion voice that allows them to be simply who they are meant to be and be kind to themselves. I show up for my clients when they have such negative thoughts, but I struggle sometimes when I'm trying to work through the voice myself. So let's dive into what imposter syndrome is, how it shows up in our lives, and talk about some actionable steps to kick in it. Imposter syndrome, sometimes called imposter phenomenon, is defined as a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. It's really important to remember, though, that imposter syndrome isn't a medical diagnosis or a mental health diagnosis. It's rather a set of thoughts that we have, and anyone can experience it. Studies indicate that those who feel or look different from their peers, such as women in high-tech careers or first-generation college students, are actually more likely to have imposter syndrome. Another study by Kajabi found that 84% of entrepreneurs and small business owners experience imposter syndrome. I sometimes wonder if that might be why there are so many businesses that fail, because we don't have the right support and are willing to come forward with the thoughts that we're having, and so it impacts our mental health. Why do we experience imposter syndrome? Well, think about it for a minute. How many of you scroll TikTok at night or Instagram or Facebook? How many posts do you see of people's mistakes or failures? Other than a cute dog tripping when catching a ball or a baby dropping something on the floor and swearing, we don't see many people sharing what they're struggling with or failed at. We turn to social media to escape, and so many people are happy to provide their wins, their perfect family picture where everyone is smiling. No need to share the other 38 pictures where one child was crying while another was sticking their tongue out while pulling someone's hair. Or my favorite, the family with several children and dogs sitting in perfect line with crisp white outfits on white couches, no stains anywhere. There's nothing about reality in that picture. People hide the messy parts of their lives and themselves too. And the more we look at these images, the more we compare ourselves with these idealized pictures of perfection that don't truly exist. And even sometimes when we succeed at tasks, feelings can creep in of us feeling like we don't deserve what we've had. It happened by luck. And then our imposter syndrome can even get worse. It's really interesting. Sometimes people that are more interested in growth and are self-aware have been shown to have higher levels of imposter syndrome than others. Given that we're wired for attachment and authenticity, we often worry that if our company gets too successful, we do better than others, we outshine people in tasks that we do, that they won't like us. Many of us are highly analytical and purposeful in our decision making, so we're aware when something isn't working and we take mistakes to heart. We struggle to let go when these things happen and feel disheartened, anxious, or even depressed. We then revert to self-blame when something goes wrong. Because someone is ambitious, you push higher and desire more, which also causes you to experience more imposter syndrome. It's such a vicious cycle. The more you achieve, the more you experience imposter syndrome, the more you then play small and you stop believing in yourself and ultimately going towards your goal. So let's quickly look at the list of what the symptoms of imposter syndrome are. I'm just going to kind of go through a list, and maybe you can count on one or two hands how many of these you had when you've gone to start a new job or a relationship, or maybe even just going to the movies by yourself. So do any of these sound familiar? You work too hard. You feel inadequate or doubt your abilities. You hide feelings of inadequacy from others. You downplay knowledge, abilities, or skills. You lack confidence. You feel overwhelmed with too many choices and are indecisive. You compare yourself to other people a lot. You distrust in your own intuition or ignore it altogether. You're a people pleaser. You dwell on the past or one mistake you made. You have a lot of negative self-talk. You want to give up despite all the hard work you've put in. You believe that you fooled others into thinking you're much more skilled than you are. And you credit your successes to luck, charm, networking, others' misjudgments, or other things besides your abilities. If you notice, these symptoms arise based on the thoughts that we have. The thoughts then impact our feelings, and feelings often can be uncomfortable and keep us stuck. Having imposter syndrome fills us with anxiety and fear that will be found out or that will be labeled a fraud, despite years of education and experience that show otherwise. Lately, I've been talking a lot with women who've been considering starting a side hustle or a business. Every single one of them described feeling anxiety and fear due to imposter syndrome. Just as they would get going on a task, something would sneak up and make them doubt themselves. Many described feelings of inadequacy, overwhelm when starting a project, confusion, insecurity, and even helplessness. They reported feeling scared to move forward or that they might fail. Others stated that they felt stupid for wanting more, inferior, or sometimes remorseful when telling others about their ideas. It was so disheartening to hear all of this. And if we dig a little deeper, these feelings are all tied up to the emotion of sadness. They're sad, feel stuck, and have trouble finding their purpose or their meaning in a once exciting task or idea. Sometimes they reported even being worried that they were deceiving others. And yet, those who have ever identified as imposters are not intentionally deceiving anyone. They just feel like they don't know what they're doing and subsequently assign guilt to those feelings of ineptitude, even though they've often experienced success. The group of women that I met with, after talking for a while, they all began to realize that they were feeling the same way, and they began to help each other. They began to reflect with one another and help each other move forward despite their own doubts. So why do people with imposter syndrome feel like a fraud when there's a ton of evidence around them that point to their success? Instead of acknowledging our capabilities and the effort we put in, we choose to attribute all our good accomplishment to external causes. According to research, many people who have imposter syndrome grew up in families that stressed achievement and success. If your parents went back and forth between overpraise and criticism, you're maybe more likely to have feelings of being a fraud later in life. Society's pressures to achieve definitely contribute to this. In her research, Dr. Valerie Young categorized people who experience imposter syndrome into 5 main groups. If you want to know more about these types, I have created a handout over on my website that goes into the details of each of them and a quick reference guide with a few simple strategies for combating the different types. Head on over to my website at www.authenticandbrave.com for the free download. According to Dr. Young, the 5 kinds are the perfectionist, who has to do everything perfect the first time, the natural genius, who thinks everything should be easy, the rugged individualist, who can't ask for help, the expert, who expects to know everything, and the superhero, who thinks that they should excel at everything. After listening to these types just briefly, which one do you think you are? And maybe you're more than one. I relate most to the superhero. In wanting to prove to everyone I am capable, I sometimes miss the natural flow of things and letting others know what's going on inside of me. I sometimes miss connection to myself and to others because I'm pushing so hard. My need for attachment and to be liked by others overshadows my authentic self, who knows she doesn't have to be everything to everyone all the time. Okay, we've covered a lot of what imposter syndrome is, what it looks like and feels like, and what the 5 types are. Now let's talk about how to address it. There's many different ideas, books, talks, and programs on how to address it. Here's what works for me, and it's the acronym RICU, R-I-C-U. Step 1, the R, is recognize and acknowledge it. Looking at imposter syndrome right on and calling it out for what it is first and foremost. Recognizing the thoughts we are having and the messages we are telling ourselves about our capabilities and skills, and then the feelings that accompany those. Often we become so mirrored in the feelings that arise about feeling inadequate or not enough that we turn away from them rather than exploring them more deeply and determining what's actually real and what isn't. When you start to have thoughts of not being enough, recognize them, label them, and accept them for existing. Step 2, the I. Investigate the thoughts and feelings and emotions that go with it. When I started getting into podcasting, I had a lot of emotions and thoughts around putting my voice out into the world. I've had to normalize the thoughts as part of wanting to try something new, and that being afraid is absolutely normal and to be expected. Once I realize what I'm thinking, I write down my thoughts and attach what I'm feeling to each thought. I often use a feelings wheel to help me identify the specific feelings. Identifying them helps give me insight into what is driving my thoughts and helps me figure out why. If you want a copy of a feelings wheel, I've also put one over on my website and you can download it there. Once I have my thoughts and feelings on paper, then I go to my journal and I answer questions such as, who told me that I'm not enough or that my way is wrong? What if that person was actually wrong? Why am I so hard on myself? What am I afraid of? And how does being afraid serve me in the grand scheme of what I'm trying to accomplish? Using these answers, I then move on to step 3, the C, challenge it. In this step, you find the evidence. Very often, we take our thoughts and feelings as fact without ever finding the evidence to support them. We can move through imposter syndrome by taking a negative thought and asking ourselves whether there is evidence to that belief or whether it's just our mind playing tricks again. To help find evidence, we can ask, what have I achieved to prove that I belong here? What qualities within me have I used to help get me to where I am in this exact moment? What positive impact have I helped to create? What positive feedback have I received from the people I respect? The final and last step is the U. Use self-compassion. Truly overcoming imposter syndrome isn't about curing it. It's about moving through it so you can get to the other side where success lies. Using the first 3 steps helps us label what we are thinking and feeling, understand it, and challenge it. Last is to work towards accepting it as a part of yourself using self-compassion and kindness. Realizing that what you're feeling is a transition can help move you from a place of forever to right now. You're not going to always feel like an imposter. You are achieving a more idealized version of yourself. Imposter syndrome may be some part of your mind resisting a very positive change in who you are. Stop fighting it, move through it, and embrace that change. It's absolutely normal to feel this way, and I'm not the only person experiencing this. That's one of the things that we can tell ourselves to know that we aren't alone in what we're feeling. So to recap, today we talked about the different types of imposter syndrome, the different thoughts and feelings of what constitutes it, and several steps to start moving through it. I'm going to turn to Lizzo for our final words of today. Like Lizzo says, you know you are a star. You can touch the sky. I know it's hard, but you have to try. So remember, you can do anything you put your mind and heart to. The world needs you. It's okay to show up as who you are. If you want more information or free downloads from today's show, please pop on over to my website at www.authenticandbrave.com. Please make sure that you like this podcast and subscribe, whichever provider that you're listening to. Until next time, keep on being authentic and brave. Thanks so much for tuning into the Authentic and Brave podcast. If you want more, head over to the authenticandbravepodcast.com for show notes and sign up for the mailing list so you'll never miss an episode. If you're looking for inspiration, connection, and people like you and me, be sure to join my exclusive community on Facebook. The link's waiting for you at authenticandbravepodcast.com. This is Dr. Beth Russell signing off. See you next time.